yeah, in terms of the interview with Cruella, as we should rightly call her. So obviously she'd gone to this encampment in Cambridge, and the students, ignored her and refused to speak to her, which was really, really good and really, really funny. And as they should. I mean, why do they have to speak to her? But they were really desperate, GB News, to talk to someone, some kind of representative or someone from the encampments or anything like this. And those students at the encampment, some of whom are members of the party that I'm a part of, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and GB News was speaking to them, and was saying, do you have anyone who would go on? And so, yeah, that's how I ended up doing it. And the reason that I took the interview was only because we found out it was Suella Braverman. What was very interesting about the interview, and I've not been in many like this, but I think I've realized it now, it's a very oppressive environment.
Please.
And actually, before you speak, they try very hard to soften you. And she tried to speak to me before the interview, and she was saying, thank you so much for coming here. I really respect your opinion. It's so important for us to have a dialogue. Very, very patronizing. And I very deliberately, I sat as far away from her as possible. And I said, okay, yes, thank you. Because it's psychological. Palestine does dominate the election and the concerns and the thoughts of people, but it's not just Palestine. It's also the NHS, it's housing, it's education. And so what I have found is that Palestine is almost a litmus test for the rest of your politics, because Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are wrong and they've taken the side of the oppressor when it comes to Israel and Palestine. You also see that in the rest of their policies and their continued promise to implement austerity effectively. I would say it's precisely to connect, why do they have money for Israel but no money for the NHS? One of the main slogans that we've been using is, we stand for healthcare and not warfare. It's a bit surreal, the amount of people that recognize me from that interview when I'm just walking around and I'm canvassing, and they go, oh my, you're the girl from the interview. I go, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a very warm response that I get. So, and just to say on that, I mean, we've all got that. There's Kemi Badenoch, the Black Tory MP, and even David Lammy is the Black Labour MP.
Lammy, yeah.
They're dreadful.
Right. So Fiona, how is the campaign going?
Thanks. Yeah, it's going really, really well so far. I mean, it's been very last minute to get everything together. But since we announced, and I just made a video online, we've had, I would say, hundreds of people signed up to the campaign, very, very enthusiastic, coming along to rallies, coming along to canvassing sessions. I've done a few more interviews now, which has also been a new, interesting experience for me. But I think the best thing about the campaign is just that everyone that we speak to has an opinion about politics. And especially in my constituency, there's a very strong anti-Labour mood. The first thing people say when you approach them with leaflets is this the Labour Party? And when we say no, then they go, okay, now I'll speak to you, which is very interesting and very significant in terms of how far, I would say, the betrayal, that mood of betrayal has kind of seeped into the consciousness of a lot of people here in East London, but also I know in other places as well.
And when you say level of betrayal is not just by Conservative, but by another mainstream party as well. I mean, is that what you're alluding to?
Yes. So, I mean, in my constituency in Stratford and Bow, but across East London as a whole, the Labour Party has had a kind of stronghold here for a long, long time. I think for a lot of people, there's a sense of you just vote Labour no matter what, that's our party, because the Tories have, it's a bit more obvious whose side they represent. They represent big business. But now I think the Labour Party have more and more become the same as the Conservatives for a lot of people. And clearly their position on Palestine has exacerbated that process and has shown to a lot of people that they don't represent right now the genuine interests of the working class at all. And so in some ways, people are more angry at Keir Starmer and the Labour Party than the Tories, if that makes sense, because it's
because with Tory, you know what you're getting. I mean, I lived in that part of the world, so I lived in Barking for 3 years, not far from your constituency. And you're right. I mean, historically, we always voted for Labour. So to be let down by Labour so spectacularly, that has been the real kind of news. I mean, we always knew where Tories stand, so there was nothing surprising about it. To see a Labour leader siding with a genocidal regime, that has been the real kind of revelation, you can say, in a really wrong way. So it's a new constituency, right? It's been carved out for the first time. And as you know, the historically that entire area, the Newham area, has supported Labour. So how
Yeah.
difficult it is for you to go and then convince those people to say, look, I am the breath of fresh air here. Vote for me.
Yeah. Well, in some respects, as you say, this betrayal, this mood has developed quite strongly over the last couple of months because of the Labour Party's position on Palestine. And so it hasn't been that difficult to connect with a real anti-Labour mood. And I think that in a way, what's happened, I mean, the whole area, when you walk around, there's Palestine flags everywhere.
Mm.
Palestine does dominate the election and the concerns and the thoughts of people, but it's not just Palestine. It's also the NHS, it's housing, it's education. And so what I have found is that Palestine is almost a litmus test for the rest of your politics because Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are wrong and they've taken the side of the oppressor when it comes to Israel and Palestine. You also see that in the rest of their policies and their continued promise to implement austerity effectively. And so that I think it's almost accelerated the election then, how far the Labour Party has gone under Keir Starmer.
Mm.
And so from that point of view, lots of people there is a strong independence mood, right? People are talking about the 4th of July as Independence Day. And we have connected with it. There will be, I'm sure, there is a layer of people who want to vote Labour because of a fear and just desperate desire to get the Tories out. And my message to those people has been, this election is part of a process that is taking place. We want to run, and I'm trying to run the best possible campaign, but I'm interested in the 5th of July and not just the 4th of
Yeah.
July.
Mm.
No matter what, there probably will be a right-wing Labour government in power, and we will have to fight that Labour government in many different avenues. The election is just one part of it for me. And so it's inviting people to be a part of a broader campaign, which I think is what can help convince them. They don't want to waste a vote. And so, yeah, it's not just about voting. It's about getting organized in as much of a way that we can. I
So
think that,
often, when I share my video, upload my video, often there are a few people who say, but why Gaza? How does Gaza bother, UK? And I explain, as you would explain, that, I mean, we are directly complicit in what's happening in Gaza. We are funding these wars. I mean, at a time when the waiting list in NHS for any illness is at least 2 years. And it's really frustrating that our government, they are splashing money in funding a third country's war when those money could well have been utilized here. When you explain these things to those constituents, do you think you get the buy-in from them?
yeah. And I would say it's precisely to connect, why do they have money for Israel, but no money for the NHS? One of the main slogans that we've been using is, we stand for healthcare and not warfare. It's when you connect those two issues together that people are more drawn into the campaign. I think when you talk about Palestine, there's a kind of instant emotional support that people have. But it's when you say, and every single penny and all of the technology and all of the resources that they're providing for Israel could be provided for us. That is when you're offering also quite a positive message because you're showing we've got something to fight for. It's not just that we're against the actions of the government and their support for Israel. We're also for something different, and we know that we can build it. I think that connecting the two issues together makes the message much more powerful and gives people hope as well.
Have you encountered any challenges so far in your very brief political journey during the campaign?
I think the main challenge is trying to be known and trying to get out there. Obviously, luckily, I have this head start
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the platform I've been able to gain since the interview with Suella Braverman. And I wouldn't be able to do this without that. It's actually very it's a bit surreal, the amount of people that recognize me from that interview when I'm just walking around and I'm canvassing and they go, oh my, you're the girl from the interview. I go, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a very warm response that I get. So I think the main challenge is, and especially as when you run as an independent candidate, you don't have the big machinery that the mainstream parties do.
And the
And so,
funding.
and the funding, yeah. But I mean, like our campaign, we've received, yeah, like hundreds of donations, which has been really amazing so far. One thing we've been saying, or I say a lot at the end of my speeches, is, we want to kick out all the war criminals, but beyond that, we've got a whole world to win, right? Like this world is ours. And I think that's important, because if you compare that to the message of the Tories, or the Labour Party, it's very, very negative, and it's all about how people need to lower their expectations and the economy's in a bad way. I'm losing my voice because I'm talking too much. And, we've got to have sensible discussions, for example, with the junior doctors and people who are going on strike. We've got to kind of squeeze ourselves down. And my campaign is basically saying that's a lie, because the rich have never been richer in society.
Mm.
The energy companies have made billions and billions in profits whilst our energy bills have gone up.
And
Yeah.
you have already made references to war criminals, and your interview with Suella Braverman, who I call here on this platform Cruella Braverman. And I have absolutely no qualms about it, because in one
Yeah.
of my videos I've said that I have always been very proud of my Indian background, but
Yeah.
the two people who really make me ashamed of sharing my Indian lineage are Rishi Sunak and Cruella Braverman, and also Preeti Patel, but she is not relevant anymore. So yeah. So tell me about that interview. How did that interview come about?
Yeah. So, and just to say on that, I mean, we've all got that. There's Kemi Badenoch, the Black Tory MP, and even David Lammy is the Black Labour MP.
David Lamb, yeah.
They're dreadful. But yeah, in terms of the interview with Cruella, as we should rightly call her. So obviously she'd gone to this encampment in Cambridge, and the students, ignored her and refused to speak to her, which was really, really good and really, really funny. And as they should. I mean, why do they have to speak to her? But they were really desperate, GB News, to talk to someone, some kind of representative or someone from the encampments or anything like this. And those students at the encampment, some of whom are members of the party that I'm a part of, the Revolutionary Communist Party, and GB News was speaking to them, and was saying, do you have anyone who would go on? And so, yeah, that's how I ended up doing it. And the reason that I took the interview was only because we found out it was Suella Braverman. And I thought, okay, this is an opportunity now because we don't get access to politicians like
Yeah,
that
yeah.
very often. And so it just felt like, and there wasn't a lot, I had like 2 hours notice or something like this. But I just thought, right, we've got to go for this now, and just put it to her straight, because I think people have felt enraged watching the mainstream media
Indeed,
for the
indeed.
last like year. I mean, always, but in particular on this question. And Suella Braverman in particular, called the marches hate marches, and
Yeah, yeah.
she really threw so much into demonizing the Palestinian movement. And so I knew I was going to say to her, the Palestine movement brought you down. I had that in my head, before before I went in, because yeah, it was an opportunity
So
to.
I was watching that interview, right? And you had like, it was like one versus two. So there was a presenter who is also, against Palestinian cause, because it being a GB News, you don't expect any neutrality from them. And then you had Suella Braverman. And then here is, a young activist, has no TV experience. And I'm looking at your facial expression, and I think, is it the silent assassin kind of thing? So I'm observing everything now before I blurt it out, and then you come up with that war criminal thing, and you don't get defensive even when you are challenged. You don't get defensive. You could continue to repeat that, and the one line that, yes, indeed, you are a war criminal.
Yeah, yeah, I think I said it twice, because I
Yes, you
just
did.
think,
You did.
I really want to say that I think it's great, actually, that you went to that camp today and tried to talk to those students, and you kind of embarrassed yourself, I would say, whilst doing that.
Would you say that Israel has a right to defend itself?
Israel does not have the right to do what it is doing right now, which is a genocide, which is the criminal enslavement and trapping people in certain places and then saying, you've got to move somewhere else. The ongoing invasion of Rafah that has been spoken about today, the displacement of millions of people, of course they don't have the right to do that, and no one thinks they do.
Right.
And you posing those questions is exactly what makes students in Cambridge think, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to any war criminal, I want to grow this encampment, I want to grow a movement.
Well, it's quite strong stuff. I mean, as far
criminal.
Yeah, I mean, so
yeah, you are a war criminal.
I mean, when I was going into it, I was thinking, right, they're going to try and, you know, say the students are silly or stupid for not speaking to you. And I had it in my head, well, why would they speak to a war criminal? Why would you speak to a war criminal? So I had that idea in my head. But what was very interesting about the interview, and I've not been in many like this, but I think I've realized it now, it's a very oppressive environment.
Jeez.
And actually, before you speak, they try very hard to soften you. And she tried to speak to me before the interview, and she was saying, you know, thank you so much for coming here. I really respect your opinion. It's so important for us to have a dialogue. Very, very patronizing. And I very deliberately, I sat as far away from her as possible. And I said, okay, yes, thank you. Because it's psychological. But then once we were into it, I felt quite angry. And, you know, a lot of people have said, you know, you stayed very calm in the interview.
That's what I was going to say. You didn't come across somebody who was so angry. I mean, I was admiring your composure, the way you managed to keep your composure.
Yeah, but I did feel angry because I was looking at her and I was thinking, she is a representative of like the worst aspects that the whole system produces, in the form of the most divisive, horrific racism, and the policies that she has tried to promote for all of her time as Home Secretary, but also just the most basic, she started attacking you're wearing trainers, you don't like the capital system, but everything about her is the most vile representative of what the system has to offer. And so I did feel anger, but I think I also felt like I didn't want to waste the opportunity. And so I think, luckily I was able to direct the anger in a political way, which is, I guess, the main message that I would try to get out to all people is, with our anger, we can channel it into organisation and into political argument. Because, I've had a few funny conversations with people afterwards. They're like, I don't know how you didn't just,
Yeah.
Always,
when I shared that video, I think I've shared the link with you. It's more than 100,000 people and thousands of comments, all praising you. While the focus has been on this interview, we also did another interview based on your second interview with the Talk TV clowns, two clowns there. And again, it's your presence of mind, where you embarrass them. The point where you embarrass them becomes the reason for them to kick you out of the show because you have caught them red-handed. How did that come about when you said, oh, so you're against killings, but not the killings of Palestinians?
The British government, which is supporting and facilitating a genocide right now, are responsible for conflict, because it's true.
Why don't you want to live in a communist country? Why don't you want to live in a communist?
There is no communist country for me
to
go.
Hang on, just a minute. If you don't like living in this country, which obviously you don't, why don't you go and live somewhere where it's better than Britain? You've slagged us off.
Why would I live somewhere else when
because
I can
obviously
change
you don't like this country.
Because I can. Why would I live somewhere else when I can change the country that I live in?
You can't change this country.
Okay.
You won't change it.
Well, let's wait and see, because the truth
the
is,
wokeists are going, and we are getting back to how we used to be.
The defining feature of politics in this country is that young people hate the political establishment. They hate the status quo.
I have been young.
It's not all about young people. Why do you think young people have more of a say?
It's not just young people. The majority
you think young people are more important?
The majority
of people don't agree with you.
The majority
and you just
of
laugh
people in Britain don't support what
Why
the government is doing in
funny,
Gaza.
By the way?
They don't support.
If you had a sensible and serious face, I'd take you more seriously. But you smile and you're doing it now. throughout what I think is one of the most dangerous times. I think we are on the verge of the Third World War.
Right.
And I don't consider people like you will be of any use whatsoever, because you get called up to go to the forces, you won't go, will you?
I don't think we're on the verge of the Third World War.
Well, I think we are, particularly with people who are behaving in the way you are.
Funny.
But it's funny, is it? It's funny. Do you know how many people get killed in a world war?
Oh, so you do care about people dying.
I said that at the beginning.
But you're
I care about...
You're a hypocrite. If you cared about people dying... thousands of people dying...
Yeah. I mean, that one was really ridiculous, and I didn't realize until just before I looked at a few clips from the show, and I thought, oh my goodness, okay, these guys are a bit silly. And so I just felt, and in all of these things, it's very important also, the way I approach it is to think you cannot concede any ground to the premise of their questions, because as soon as you do that, you're accepting their own philosophy, basically, and approach to the discussion. So I knew that I had to avoid doing that in some way. And I think, because some people have asked me, are you media trained? And I'm not media trained at all. And I think that's actually why, because in normal debating or media, you are, they really push you. You've got to not be too combative or it's, I think what people like is, you're a liar and just saying it straight and nothing else around it. From the Cruella interview, and also I think from the James Whale interview, what people like the most is the direct.
That's what, saying it the way it should be. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that the ability to do that would only come from if you feel politically confident in what you're saying. When you're a bit unsure, you'll give more ground to maybe a bit of nuance or whatever. But
so is that direct approach, the feisty approach, does that come from you being a communist activist? Because communism is all about, sort of fighting for a cause and being fierce about, is that kind of like linked to that?
Yeah, I think I have an anchor in my politics. I'm very grounded in that I don't take, because some people will be against me and that's fine. And they might use personal insults, but it doesn't really affect me because I'm not really there. Okay, I am an individual, I'm a person and so on and so forth. But my politics is a real anchor, which is about, fighting for the liberation of humanity. It's the biggest possible task to change the whole world, which is a huge task. And all of these small interviews along the way I see are just part of that journey. But for sure, I think having confidence in yourself and also that you're part of something wider than just yourself is what can give you or any person the ability to stand up, because it is nerve-wracking. And these guys were, I thought after the interview they would drop the facade, but they didn't. They were, get out. I thought, okay, so I just left and that's fine.
And they don't even realize that they're exposing themselves spectacularly. I mean, it's there on the screen, so people are kind of noticing, who they are.
Yeah.
Before the interview, I talked about, the communism in UK. How relevant that is today, and how challenging has it been for you to sell that ideology, to people in a predominantly capitalist country?
Yeah, it's a good question, because of course it comes up. I mean, some people, they say to me, they like the Palestine message, they like what I'm saying, but then they say, well, why communism? What does this mean? And I think it's because that, one, I think there's a generation of people who've kind of gone through the Corbyn movement, and they, Corbyn popularized the ideas of socialism for a whole generation. And I would put myself in that. I mean, I joined the Labour Party when I was 18 because of Jeremy Corbyn, because of Corbyn, and because I wanted to support him and so on and so forth. But that project failed eventually. And actually, I think, and it's not even just about Britain. I think there's a lot of people, I mean, Bernie Sanders also was like socialist, and it's all kind of come about. But what it seemed to end up in was just reforms to the system. And I'm not opposed to any reform that makes people's lives better. In fact, I'd be the biggest fighter for any and all such reforms. But I think there's a point where you have to yearn for something more fundamentally different with the whole of the system. And even Starmer has called himself a socialist.
Yeah.
And so I think that
the son of a toolmaker.
Yeah, the son of a toolmaker. And so, you know, there's a lot of negative connotations with communism and the word communism. But I would say even the Palestine movement has taught me that if you can just explain what you genuinely mean and what you genuinely stand for, not to feel, cowed by people's preconceived ideas of what you're talking about, and just be honest. And me, when I say I'm a communist, it's because, one, I'm completely opposed to the capitalist system and the profit motive. I think we need genuine workers' democracy and workers' control, and an economy that's planned on the base of need and not profit. And when you put it in those words, people respond quite positively to it. I would say most of all young people. I think there's a real, if you want to call it Gen Z or young, drive towards radical politics. And it's because they can see no future based on this current system. Not everyone has an exact idea in their head as to what it looks like. But I think when I say I'm a communist, and that means the complete opposite of capitalism, it means using the wealth in society to fund what we actually need and having workers have genuine say in their lives and control and democracy. People really reach towards that in a positive way.
But there is a danger as well, from my experience, that we live, there is no denying the truth that we live in a world where media and the narrative is being controlled by pro-Zionist interest. Now, the most easiest way to defeat any argument from the opposite side, from people like you who are making powerful argument, is to discredit you. And because of you following a communist ideology, it's very easy for them to kind of link you to Chinese, or even, sort of Russian and whatnot. So it's just that, that awareness is key, because there will be attempts made. It's from my experience, I'm telling you. I've just come back from India after fighting Modi's right wing for last 8 years. And these are very tried and tested, methods that these forces use.
And what you're saying is right. Like there's a task. It's a journey. But I think we're moving in the right direction. And I want to be honest about my politics and who I am and what I stand for. And then have conversations with people on that basis. I think, the way I've run this campaign, I would say, is quite different from mainstream parties. When mainstream parties canvass, they knock on doors just to find out where their pre-existing voters exist. And then what they do on election day is go to those houses and say, make sure you go out and vote. They don't really try and convince the people they're talking to.
Yeah.
When I go out, and especially if I call myself a communist and they see it on the leaflet, I have to explain it and defend it and convince people. And I have been able to do so. And I think that's the best thing, is that it's causing that discussion and people joining the campaign off the back of it. Of course there'll be some people who don't agree. That's politics, that's a democracy, but we're in the beginnings of a process, I think, which is going in the right direction.
Would you have wished that you didn't have to face a Workers' Party candidate, because you both in a way kind of like share the same ideology as far as the Palestinians cause is concerned? Do you think that is kind of giving it away to Labour?
Obviously, it would be better if there weren't so many, but there are a few independents running as well. I think there's 4 independents now. And I mean, obviously, it's a good thing that there's a lot of people out there who want to fight and want to raise the cause, and that's good. But I think that, part of the reason why I chose, and it wasn't a plan of mine to stand or anything like this. It was, I only took the decision a couple of days after the election was announced. I was at an encampment when it was announced. I was at Queen Mary. And it was just this shock thing, and it came about. And I remember I posted a video saying, you know, no matter what happens on the 5th of July, we've got to fight the Labour government. And then in the few days after that, I was having a lot of conversations with people, and a lot of people like asking me, you know, you should stand, like you should do something. And I thought, and I don't think this is a negative thing, although like, some people have suggested that it is. I thought, yeah, what if I run and I talk about Palestine and I talk about the encampments and I talk about the fact, and I'm very honest about this, being an MP alone is not going to change the world at all, but it is a platform. And I want to use the platform to encourage a mass movement outside of Parliament, which will be the most effective thing to halt British imperialism and in its role in Gaza, but its role in general. And I felt like I was very well placed, and I live here. I actually live in Stratford. I mean, it's totally is. And I think some of the other candidates don't actually live in Stratford, but so yeah, I thought, you know what, I believe I can organize a huge campaign, and so I'm going to do it. And I think for me, what's significant is that it will outlast the election, no matter what. What we have and what we're trying to grow is a wider organization and a wider campaign. And so I think it was right for me to stand, and I think that's being proven as we go along. But yeah, I mean, obviously, it would. Yeah, some of the other
it
stuff
would have been better if, you know, there weren't too many independents. I mean, cutting each other's votes. So in the end, you know, is for you to speak to your potential voters and say why they should vote for you on 4th of July. So it's your platform.
Thanks. I would say that, you know, I am not a politician. I am a campaigner, and that is what I want to do. Although it's true that as an individual MP, you cannot change everything, you have a platform, and I would use that platform every single day, one, to expose what's happening. I mean, as an MP, there's this thing called parliamentary privilege, where you can say whatever you want, basically, in Parliament, and no one can sue you or come for you or anything like this. So I would use that every single day as much as possible. But also I would look outside of Parliament to organise campaigns in the local community, with the trade unions, with schools, with universities, because I know that that is where real power lies. And in combination with an MP on the side of workers and young people, that could be a really powerful, like, stronghold for something that needs to go beyond like just local politics. I've been at a few hustings recently, and a lot of the questions that you get are linked to the individual problems people face in their lives, of course. But a lot of those problems are down to lack of funding for the council, for example. And the only way that we're going to get that funding is not going to come from just politely asking for it or anything like this. But there are radical examples in history of councils fighting back against the cuts that central government is trying to impose on them. That is the kind of activity that I would spend as much as my time as possible trying to organize, to fight back against the cuts, refuse them, and to campaign and to build power kind of collectively. And I think that's why people should vote for me, is because I don't see this as, becoming a politician, but as building and gaining a platform to organize people outside of Parliament as much as possible. And I don't just want small reforms here and there. I want a fundamental transformation of the problems that people face in their lives, which come down to the profit motive and the inequality that it produces.